Thank you for the chance to join you, at least virtually, in Brussels this morning. The European 5G conference is a great opportunity for stakeholders from around the world to get together and discuss the policies that are going to be key to 5G and next generation deployment. If you can stay awake and make it through my brief remarks, you're really in for a treat. Both today and tomorrow, you're going to hear from a great lineup of speakers, including my good friend Roberto Viola, who is the Director General of DG Connect at the European Commission. For my part, I hope to review the discussions and learn from the good work you're doing, whether at the European Commission, the European Parliament, or in member states, to ensure the deployment of 5G networks. And in my brief remarks this morning, I want to give you just a quick overview of the steps we're taking in the US to help speed the private sector's deployment of 5G. And there's no question that 5G is going to be transformative, both from a technological perspective, but also an economic perspective. And how do we know this? Think back 10 years ago. Think back to the last time we were on the cusp of a transition in wireless, then from 3G to 4G technologies. Think about your own life and how different it was. 10 years ago, catching a ride across town meant calling a phone number or finding a cab line to stand in, waiting around for a cab to show up, hopefully, paying exorbitant fees, and maybe ultimately getting to your destination. Think about all the rides and the places that you just didn't even consider going because of the hassle. Now we have an entire 4G app economy where apps like Uber and Lyft, Via, Blacklane are all competing right on your smartphone to get you a ride. Or, for instance, think about your own dating life. 10 years ago, meeting your significant other required, and now stay with me, I know this is going to sound very 1950s to the millennials that might be out at the conference, but you actually had to walk up to somebody, in person mind you, and actually talk to them in person and ask him or her out on a date. Now I'm told by the millennials that are on my staff that a potential loved one is merely a swipe away. Now, all of that is to say that 4G ushered in this app economy that transformed the way that we live, we work, and we play. And 5G is going to be even more transformative, and we're only getting a glimpse at it right now. For my part, I think about 5G in essentially 3 buckets. 1, everything you can do on your smartphone today is going to be better and faster. Downloading a movie today that takes minutes could take seconds in a 5G world. It's pretty good, but this first bucket is the least transformative of what 5G is going to enable. The second bucket is even more competitive home broadband. With 5G networks, consumers will be able to see fiber-like speeds at their home delivered wirelessly. That's going to make it a lot easier and lower the regulatory barriers and the costs for multiple operators to compete for your home broadband dollars, and that's going to be a very good thing for consumers. And the third bucket is going to be a new wave of innovation and entrepreneurship. It's something that we only have a glimpse of today, whether it's new telehealth applications, the Internet of Things, virtual reality, connected cars. There's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation that this 5G network is going to enable. So the question for regulators like me is, what can we do to make sure that this transition to 5G happens quickly and happens ubiquitously, so that every consumer, no matter where they're living, can see and realize the economic benefits and opportunity that come with 5G. As I consider it, I look at 3 main actions that we need to take as regulators. And in the US, I'm glad to report that we've made significant progress on those 3 areas. They're infrastructure, spectrum, and 5G jobs. And I want to briefly walk through those 3 this morning. On the infrastructure side, we need to update and modernize our rules. In the US right now, we have about 300,000 cell sites across the country. But to support 5G, we need to see a 10 to 100-fold increase in cell sites. The old rules that were in place during the 3G and 4G deployments of the past are simply not up to speed when it comes to the massive new deployment of small cells and other next generation infrastructure that we need to see to support 5G. So we need to do what I've described in the US as getting our regulations 5G ready. We took 2 significant steps in this direction last year at the FCC. First, in March, we updated our historic and environmental preservation review procedures that have applied at the federal level. In short, these are rules the FCC adopted back when almost every new wireless antenna site was a 200-foot tower, which, if I have my metric conversions right, is about 60.96 meters. The point is, the rules designed for those large towers didn't make sense for the 5G era, where upwards of 80% of new deployments are going to be these backpack-sized small cells. So we updated our approach by excluding small cells, those building blocks of 5G, from the environmental and historic preservation rules that apply to those large 200-foot towers. Second, we took a look at the state and local government review procedures that every provider must go through when they put up an antenna site. And here's why we did that. When I think about this race to 5G, in the US at least, the finish line for me is not the first time that we see 5G deployments in New York or San Francisco or even San Jose. The finish line is making sure that every single community in the country has a fair shot at seeing these next generation 5G networks. In too many cases, a handful of outlier cities were charging exorbitant fees and taking too long to review applications looking to deploy small cells and other 5G infrastructure. So here's what we did at the FCC. We recognized, for one, that there are reasonable limits that apply to the fees and other charges that local governments impose when they review the siting and other applications needed for the rollout of 5G. We wanted to make sure that the capital needed to deploy 5G infrastructure is actually going into the ground, deploying these networks, rather than being used as a revenue generating opportunity for local governments. Second, we put in place shot clocks that effectively require state and local governments to act on siting applications within a reasonable period of time. For instance, if a new small cell application is looking to add an antenna to an existing site, our rules of the FCC say that local governments should act within 60 days of that application being filed. So we're taking good steps to make sure, from an infrastructure perspective, our regulations are 5G ready. I want to turn now to the second main effort we're engaged in to support the deployment of 5G networks, and that's spectrum. With 3G and 4G networks, we focused a lot on low-band spectrum and to some extent mid-band spectrum as well. But for 5G, we need to make spectrum available across every band, from low to mid to high band spectrum. And we also need to be very focused on creating large blocks of contiguous spectrum of 100 megahertz or more in many cases. And that's what we're doing at the FCC. Right now, as we speak, we are in the process of finishing up our auction for the first ever high band 5G spectrum, the 28 gigahertz band. Right after that, we're going to move forward with an auction of 24 gigahertz spectrum, and we've put steps in place so that this year we can move forward with an auction of 3 additional millimeter wave bands. And on top of that, we've redoubled our efforts to look at mid-band spectrum as well. After all, 5G is a technology that we are going to see push from high band to mid-band down to low band spectrum. And it's important that we're moving forward now with opening up all these new spectrum bands. And that's because 2019 is the year of 5G. It's a year where we're going to see the first commercial launch of 5G networks, the first 5G smartphone, and the first truly mobile version of 5G will be deployed. So I'm glad the FCC has taken these steps to get more spectrum into the marketplace. Finally, I want to talk about one last issue that I think is critical to the deployment of 5G networks, and it's not one that you often hear a lot about at conferences like this. It's workforce development. You see, deploying next generation networks, particularly 5G networks, is tough work. It's a lot of hard hats and bucket trucks, excavators and harnesses. Those jobs are just as important to 5G as coders and programmers. So in my time at the FCC, I've tried to spend a lot of my days outside of Washington. My first trip as an FCC commissioner was to Claremont, North Carolina, a small town that manufactures the fiber needed to support a lot of these high-capacity 5G networks. I've been to a manufacturing plant in Sioux City, Iowa, where they're welding and galvanizing the steel needed to support this next generation infrastructure. And I've been to Yankton, South Dakota, at a plant that's making the small cell poles that can hold these 5G capable antennas. And I've had the chance to see firsthand the tough work that it takes to deploy these networks. Whether it's on a tower 2,000 feet above the ground or dozens of feet below the permafrost, these are tough jobs. A lot of what I've been doing at the FCC has been designed to make these jobs easier from a regulatory perspective. But through these experiences, I've learned about some of the skill sets, whether it's the training or the qualifications needed to get one of these 5G jobs and make sure that these networks can be deployed quickly and safely. In the US, for instance, there are community colleges that we can lean on to provide the types of skills needed to enter this industry. And I think there's more progress that we can make on that front, and I look forward to focusing on those issues this year. So in short, I think we're at a really unique time for consumers in telecom. There's two great trends that are merging together. On the one hand, we're seeing these great technological breakthroughs, including the use of millimeter wave spectrum for mobile. And on the other hand, we're getting our regulations right to support the deployment of these next generation networks. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the progress that we're going to make in 2019, the year of 5G. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join you at this conference, and I look forward to reviewing the discussion that follows. Thanks.